Bills Mafia, we need to talk. And this one might make you a little nervous. Buffalo just brought in a brand new defensive coordinator with a system that's supposed to unlock talent the old regime couldn't figure out how to use. Sounds exciting, right? Except there's a massive question mark sitting right in the middle of that defense. One that could either be the best surprise of the entire 2026 season or the exact reason this whole thing falls apart before it even gets going. We're talking about the interior defensive line. The trenches, the unglamorous grunt work in the middle of the field that never gets the highlight reels but decides more football games than almost anything else. And today, we're breaking this position group down 3 different ways. Why you should be genuinely excited about it, why you should be seriously worried about it, and why there are still some massive unanswered questions hanging over the whole thing, including one contract number in particular that should make every single Bills fan a little queasy. So stick around, because by the end of this, you're going to understand exactly why this might be the most unpredictable position group on the entire roster heading into training camp. Reason to be excited. Ed Oliver finally gets set free. Let's start on a high note, because there's real reason for optimism here, and it starts with the most talented player in this entire group, Ed Oliver. On pure talent alone, Ed Oliver should be Buffalo's best interior defensive lineman, full stop. The problem is, last season got completely derailed by injuries, limiting just how much of that talent Bills fans actually got to see on Sundays. But when Oliver was healthy and on the field, especially down the stretch of the 2024 season, he looked genuinely terrific. And there was a real sense that his best flashes were starting to become more consistent rather than just occasional highlights. Now here's where things get interesting heading into this new season. The arrival of new defensive coordinator Jim Leonard could be exactly the kind of scheme change that finally unlocks Oliver's full potential. Leonard's system relies on 5-man fronts, which naturally cuts down on the double teams that have bogged Oliver down in previous years and gives him far more freedom to shoot upfield and disrupt plays in the backfield. And if you're worried that Ed Oliver's smaller frame makes him a poor fit for this style of defense, don't be. There's a growing list of NFL players around his exact size thriving in this identical scheme. Zach Allen has become an outright star for the Denver Broncos, which is precisely where Jim Leonard's scheme originates from. Milton Williams is doing damage for the New England Patriots. There's every reason to believe Ed Oliver can follow that same blueprint and finally become the top 10 caliber playmaker Buffalo drafted him to be all those years ago. Obviously, health remains the massive variable here, but the scheme fit alone is enough to get genuinely excited about what Oliver could look like in 2026. Reason to be excited. Deontay Walker's quiet breakout season 2. The next reason for optimism comes from second-year interior lineman Deontay Walker. Let's be honest, the pre-draft evaluation on Walker wasn't exactly glowing. There were real, documented concerns about his game heading into the league, including back issues, along with tape that showed a player who, after logging heavy college snap counts, would sometimes get worn down late in games, getting rooted off the ball and struggling to consistently recruit his lower half when anchoring against the run. And to be fair, some of those exact same concerns did show up during his rookie season in Buffalo. But here's the flip side that gets a lot less attention. The high-end flashes showed up too, and showed up in a big way. Walker produced some genuinely impressive splash plays as a rookie, and moving forward, he looks well positioned to build on that. He's now further removed from those earlier back concerns. He came through a fully healthy season, and he spent an entire NFL offseason in a real conditioning and strength program. By all accounts, he's trimmed up his frame and cleaned things up physically. And, maybe most encouraging of all, the messaging out of the building suggests Buffalo isn't planning to pigeonhole him strictly into the A-gaps. He's going to get opportunities to play in wider alignments too, which happens to be exactly where his game translates best. Walker is at his most dangerous when he's pursuing laterally, using his nose for the football, his upper body power, and his length to make plays across the field. Where he struggles is the pure phone booth anchor and eat block style of play, keeping his pads low and holding his ground in confined spaces. Freeing him up to play faster and looser instead of forcing him into that anchor role could be exactly the adjustment that turns him into what's looking more and more like an absolute steal of a 4th-round pick. Reason to be excited. A whole room full of lottery tickets beyond the 2 more established names, there's a genuinely intriguing cluster of young players with real untapped upside. TJ Sanders, Dwayne Carter, and Landon Jackson. None of these guys are proven commodities yet, but that's exactly the point of this section. There's a lot to be optimistic about, even with the uncertainty attached. TJ Sanders is an athletic second-round pick entering year 2. Landon Jackson brings serious athleticism into his second season as a third-round selection. Dwayne Carter, a third-round pick from a couple years back, lost his entire previous season to an Achilles injury, but remains an intriguing developmental piece. Buffalo has clearly made meaningful draft investments in all 3 of these players, which signals real organizational belief in their long-term upside, even if we don't yet know exactly what they'll become. And there are legitimate role changes worth watching closely here too. Carter has reportedly bulked up significantly and is expected to play primarily in the A-gaps. Landon Jackson has also added weight and now profiles more as a 5 technique, 4-eye type of player. And TJ Sanders presents perhaps the most fascinating reimagining of the group. Could he transform into something like a John Franklin Myers type piece for this defense? A completely different projection than what he was originally drafted to become. If even a couple of these young players start to hit, this room could look dramatically different and dramatically better by the back half of the season. Reason to be excited. New scheme, new coaching, a real fresh start. The final reason for optimism is simply this: everything about the coaching and scheme is different now. Under the previous defensive staff, this group was genuinely frustrating to watch develop. Buffalo brought in player after player who ended up performing better somewhere else. Names like Poona Ford, Tim Settle, and Austin Johnson. Even to a lesser extent, Star Lotulelei and Vernon Butler. Even a homegrown piece like Harrison Phillips arguably should have been retained rather than allowed to walk. There's a real argument to be made that there's been a pattern of mise-valuation and under-optimization at this position for years. Not necessarily picking the wrong player outright, but failing to get the most out of the talent once it actually arrived in the building. And it's hard to fully reconcile the selection of Ed Oliver himself when you consider that within the next 10 picks of that same 2019 draft, names like Dexter Lawrence, Jeffrey Simmons, and Christian Wilkins came off the board. 3 players who've gone on to have significant NFL careers of their own. The good news heading into 2026 is that while general manager Brandon Beane's fingerprints are still all over the roster construction, the coaching piece complementing that player acquisition is now completely different, and that alone provides a real layer of intrigue about whether these existing investments finally start paying off the way they were originally supposed to. Now let's flip this thing upside down. All right, that's the sunny side of the street. But if you're a Bills fan who's learned to keep both eyes open, you already know there's a flip side to every one of these storylines. And unfortunately, this position group might have earned the unwanted title of the single least confident position group on the entire roster heading into 2026. Here's why that's a completely valid defensible take. The biggest issue in a single word: unknowns. Everything discussed above about these young players carries genuine promise, sure, but the honest truth is we simply don't know much about most of them yet. And that uncertainty doesn't stop with the young guys, it extends all the way up to Ed Oliver himself, the most established, most talented player in this entire room. He's coming off an injury that wasn't just a simple bicep issue. There was a real knee situation involved as well. Yes, he eventually returned and saw the field for a handful of snaps against Denver in the playoff loss, but the lingering question remains: where exactly is he physically right now? Is he fully healthy? Is he trusting his body to do everything it's supposed to do at full speed? And layered on top of the physical uncertainty is the fact that he's now learning an entirely new defensive scheme from scratch. Even with legitimate optimism about the fit, there's real unknown risk attached to your best and most important player. Then there's Dion Walker, who's genuinely intriguing, but is now heading into a role where significantly more will be asked of him. He's clearly the second most interesting player in this room, and he's going to log heavy snap counts. But is he actually ready for that expanded workload? Has his processing and diagnosis of run schemes actually sharpened up, or is that still a work in progress? He's trimmed his frame down, sure, but does he still carry the same level of raw power for a player who got displaced fairly often in the run game as a rookie? TJ Sanders presents his own version of uncertainty. He was originally drafted to be a penetrating 3 technique, and now, in this new scheme, that's simply not the role he's expected to play. His experience logging snaps on the edge last season may genuinely help him transition into whatever role Jim Leonard has in mind. But let's be honest, Nobody evaluating him during the draft process was picturing him as an odd front 4-eye or 5 technique type of player. That's a real projection, not a proven trait. Dwayne Carter missed the entirety of last season recovering from an Achilles injury. Watching his college tape at Duke, evaluators saw an interior pass rushing player, with the primary concern always centering on his run defense. Now he's ballooned up to 335 pounds and is being asked to anchor in the A-gaps against the run. A completely different athletic profile than what he was before the injury, carrying an extra 30 to 40 pounds on a body that's still working its way back from a serious injury. What does that actually look like on the field? Nobody knows yet. Landon Jackson is dealing with his own injury history as well, coming off yet another knee issue, on top of a track record of knee problems dating back to high school and his early college career. He's added weight this offseason with hopes of getting back to doing more of what made him effective in college, which offers some optimism, but the blunt truth is he didn't impress anybody during camp or preseason last year. He struggled to even earn a game day jersey some weeks, and when he finally did suit up, he didn't make much of an impact before landing on the injury list again. What does he actually become in year 2? Genuinely unclear. And beyond those names, you're looking at a supporting cast of complete unknown commodities: rookie 5th-round pick Zion Durant, journeyman veteran Fee Mathie, who's bounced around multiple different NFL rosters, and Zion Logue rounding out the group. That's an entire pile of players where there's simply nothing concrete to point to and say with any confidence, this guy has proven he can do this specific job at this level. It's all projection. It's all hope. And for anyone who genuinely believes games are won and lost in the trenches, that level of uncertainty at such a critical position is legitimately uncomfortable. Even if half of these optimistic projections actually come true, the deeper question remains, is that even enough? Buffalo is going to need to roll 5, even 6 players deep at this position, and right now there's just not enough established proven production to feel fully settled about it. This might be one of the most unsettled position groups Buffalo has had in years, and it happens to be an incredibly important one. The questions that should keep you up at night beyond the excitement and the concern, there are 3 lingering questions that deserve real attention as this season approaches. First, and maybe most alarming of all, Ed Oliver's contract situation is about to become a genuine problem. His cap had exploded to $28.3 million in 2027, the final year of his current deal, with a significant void year attached even further down the line. That is an enormous number for Buffalo's front office to plan around, and it raises a real question about what happens next. Does Buffalo simply release him when that number hits? Does the front office instead work out an extension that spreads the cap burden across future years while committing even further to a player who'll be turning 29 in 2027, keeping in mind that not every player ages gracefully into their 30s at that specific position? A lot of that decision will likely hinge on exactly how this upcoming season plays out, both for Oliver individually and for this group as a whole. But make no mistake, that number is a real storyline worth tracking closely. Second, what does the actual snap rotation look like once the season gets underway? Under the previous coaching staff, Buffalo primarily leaned on a 2-man rotation at defensive tackle. Under this new scheme, you're now looking at a 3-man front on early downs, shifting down by John Franklin Myers, nose tackle DJ Jones, Malcolm Roach, and a 5th rotational piece, each logging over 400 snaps on the season. If Buffalo mirrors that same structure, Ed Oliver almost certainly slots in as the Zach Allen equivalent workhorse. Landon Jackson and TJ Sanders likely platoon in the role most similar to what John Franklin Myers provided in Denver, splitting reps based on whoever's playing better at a given point. Deon Walker looks like Buffalo's version of that DJ Jones nose tackle role in terms of snap volume. And the 5th rotational spot likely gets divided up between Dwayne Carter and some combination of the newer, less proven names. It's a fascinating structural question that should sort itself out over the coming weeks of camp and preseason. And finally, the third lingering question, why didn't Buffalo invest more heavily in this position group this offseason? Given the arrival of a brand new defensive coordinator and the clear uncertainty already surrounding this room heading into the year, there was a reasonable expectation that the front office would add proven, established talent here. Instead, the only real move made was drafting Zion Durant in the 5th round. Hardly a needle mover for a group with this many questions attached to it. Buffalo did lose a handful of veterans from this room, but None of those departures feel like significant losses on their own. The real question is whether this lack of outside investment reflects genuine organizational confidence in the upside of these young players already on the roster, or whether it simply reflects a prioritization decision, pouring resources elsewhere instead. And when you look at where Buffalo actually did spend its resources this offseason, that theory holds some weight. The front office added proven talent at outside linebacker, bringing in a veteran pass rusher and using their first draft pick there as well. They clearly prioritized the secondary too, handing out free agent money at cornerback, signing a proven veteran safety, using significant draft capital including a trade-up in the second round, and adding even more depth later in the draft while signing additional secondary help in free agency. On top of all that, Buffalo traded for a proven veteran wide receiver, absorbed a significant contract, gave up a second-round pick in the process, and still used another selection on a wide receiver in the draft. All of that spending had to come from somewhere, and it increasingly looks like the interior defensive line simply wasn't viewed as the top offseason priority this time around. Was that the right call? Genuinely unclear right now. Maybe this ends up being the storyline everyone laughs about by season's end, wondering why anyone doubted this young group in the first place. That would be the best possible outcome for Buffalo, and it's a legitimately possible one given the talent and scheme fit already discussed. But there's also a very real world where this exact lack of investment becomes the thing holding this entire defense back from reaching its full potential in Jim Leonard's debut season. Wrapping it up, so there you have it, a defensive line room with genuine star potential in Ed Oliver, a breakout candidate in Deon Walker, a cluster of intriguing young lottery tickets in TJ Sanders, Dwayne Carter, and Landon Jackson, and a completely new coaching philosophy that could finally unlock talent this front office has struggled to properly develop for years. But sitting right alongside all of that promise is a mountain of legitimate uncertainty, a looming contract decision worth nearly $30 million, and a genuine question about whether Buffalo did enough this offseason to actually address one of its most critical, unresolved position groups. This is exactly the kind of storyline that could define Buffalo's season in either direction, and it's one worth watching incredibly closely as training camp and preseason unfold. So here's what we want to know from all of you. Are you buying the hype on this group, or are you genuinely worried heading into camp? Do you think Ed Oliver finally breaks out in this new scheme, or does his injury history catch up with him again? And should Buffalo have done more this offseason to reinforce this room? Drop your thoughts down in the comments because we know Bills Mafia always brings the passion on conversations like this one. If you enjoyed today's breakdown, make sure you like this video, and if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss a single update as camp gets underway. Share this with a fellow Bills fan, leave a rating and a review, and we'll see you again real soon. Go Bills!